Welcome to the Wish I'd Known Then podcast, where we focus on how authors found success, looking at strategies that have taken them to the top of the bestseller charts, as well as what they've learned from their mistakes. Because being an indie author is more than knowing the latest marketing trend. It's about being innovative and creative and learning from your mistakes.
Welcome to the Wish I'd Known Then podcast. I'm Sarah Rosette.
And I'm Jamie Albright. And this week on the show, we have
Nancy Warren.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. And I was not able to be part of the interview this week, and we'll talk about that later. But tell us about it, Sarah. What y'all talk about?
Well, Nancy's been in publishing. She's been writing and publishing for 20 years. And so we talked a lot about transitioning from being traditionally published into hybrid into indie. And she has tips on that. And her books, she loves to write humor. And we talked a lot about comedy and writing funny things and how kind of breaking that down. And it was just really good. And one of her things that we talked about was why she loves indie publishing. And her whole thing is like, it gives her freedom to do things. And that's, for me, I love the creative freedom. But she describes how she loves how it lets her, in non-COVID times, move around the country or the world and visit different places and live in different places. So it was a very good interview.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. And that kind of transitions into why I wasn't on the interview. The Tuesday before last, my daughter and her son were gifted a trip to Disney for their 5 kids and 2 other people. And so they asked if I would go and then the other grandmother go. And so in 4 days, we threw together a trip to Disney. My daughter's got quite a big Instagram following. So one of her Instagram followers is a Disney planner and planned the whole thing for us. And so I was at Disney last week, and it was amazing. And just be able to be there with my family and my kids and stuff. And, I debated, I was telling Sarah, I debated on whether to talk about this because, a lot of people would see it as, just an excuse not to write, which, of course, I'm always looking for those. But if this year's taught us nothing else, it's taught us a few things, that you can never have too many streaming services, that, dry shampoo is a necessity, not a luxury. And, and the Zoom meetings are kind of like, mullets, business on the top, party on the bottom. And that Tiger King is an absolute shit show. So, it's taught us all those things, but it's
We've
also
learned so much this year.
Yes, so much. But it's also taught me that, family is precious. We're not guaranteed tomorrow. And that, I want to be able to spend time with family and be with them as much as I can. And so for me, I just didn't even think twice. And does that mean I'm going to have to do extra work? Yes, it does mean that, but it's worth it because I was able to have that time with my grandchildren. And my oldest granddaughter is 8. My son-in-law and daughter, they have foster children. And so the oldest is 8, and it was just such a magical time to be with her during that week last week. And that's why I wasn't there. So it really isn't an excuse not to write, but I guess what I'm saying is we all have to have our priorities. And for me, as I've said many times before, my family is my priority. And I love writing, and I love this job, and I love when I put out a book and the readers' reactions and stuff. And I love my readers, but my family is my priority and always will be. So,
well, I think you should feel zero worry or shame or anything.
I don't.
Because, people are going, a free trip to Disney? Yes, please. I'll hop on that.
Yeah,
I know. That sounds great.
I know. And also I've dreamt dreamed, I never know, an entire book, like beginning to end.
Oh my goodness.
The characters, the conflict, the happily ever after, the whole thing. I've never done that before. So I wrote it all down while I was there, and it will probably be the 4th book in this series that I'm doing with the small town royalty. Yeah.
So see, you were working. You were working.
Even while I was sleeping. So anyway, that's what was going on with me. What about you, Sarah? What's happening with you? Big stuff, I hear.
Well, we're looking at houses. We may or may not move. So I will just leave that there because the market is just crazy right now. Mm-hmm. But I thought earlier this week, if it really is, sometimes I think it really is a miracle. I've even published one book, gotten one book written and published, because there's just like so much going on. So like there's big stuff going on in our life, but then it's just like all the little interruptions when you're trying to accomplish like one thing. So but I did make it through and I got some things finished. And the cool thing I wanted to share was that I was working on the copy edits for my next historical mystery, and I updated my Mac to the new operating system. So when you do that, I had this old version of Word for Mac. And I just moved it from one Mac to another. So it was like actually like a 2007 version.
Yeah.
So when you update, that stuff no longer works. So I have a new version that I could upload. And I thought, you know what, let me just open it in Pages and see what it looks like, because that's in the Mac thing. And it was so easy to use. I couldn't believe it.
No,
and
it
imports like all the comments, all the corrections, and it the way, it has a little sidebar. And I know you can do this in Word too, but in Pages, it has a little sidebar with all the corrections, and you just hover over a correction, and it has this little curved line that goes down and shows you where it is in the text.
Yeah.
And it was just so much easier to use for me, because I'm very visual. So I'll post a screenshot of that in the group. And then the other great thing about it was like, I go through and I look at each one. And then if you just highlight, let's say like you highlight 3 paragraphs and right click and say accept changes, it accepts them all in that section. And you don't have to go through one at a time and accept it, So for me, that was great. So I finally got through that, and that's off to the next step.
That's awesome.
So, so that was really cool. So if anybody has a Mac, you can I got the document. It was a Word document back from the copy editor, but you can open it in Pages, and then you can export again into Word, because most editors and proofreaders like Word.
Right.
So I thought that was way cool.
That is very cool. Yeah. Awesome. Well, speaking of the group, tonight we are having a Zoom call with Sarah and myself, where we're going to answer your questions. So,
and it will be on Zoom. And
the link is
we
in the
decided
group.
that we would, after it's over, we will post it in the group. So if you can't be there, you can watch it later.
Right. And so the link is in the group. So Wish I'd Known Them for Writers Facebook group, and you can join us tonight, or you can just watch the replay. And then I guess that's it.
Yeah. So we will get to Nancy's interview, and we will see y'all in a little bit.
Yeah.
All right. Well, today we're super excited to have Nancy Warren with us. Hi, Nancy. How are you doing?
I'm awesome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're excited to talk to you today. So today it's just me. Jamie had something come up and she can't make it, but we're going to press on and talk about books and writing and being in publishing for the long haul, kind of. So let me read Nancy's bio and we'll jump right into the questions. Nancy Warren is a USA Today bestselling author of more than 60 novels. Nancy is originally from Vancouver, Canada, but she tends to wander. She currently lives in an 18th century house in Bath, England, where she loves to pretend she's Jane Austen, or at least a character in an Austen novel, which I would totally want to do that. When she's not writing, she's hiking, skiing, traveling, or sipping wine. So that sounds great. How did you end up in an 18th century house in Bath?
Well, that's a little out of date, that bio. First of all, I'm over 100 novels now. And because of the pandemic, I'm not actually in Bath right now. I am in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada, but I do live part of the year in Bath. And how that happened is I decided to take a master's in creative writing, and I wanted to do it in England. And I love Bath. And so I went to Bath Spa University in 2016, and I lived in this proper Georgian manor house. I just rented a flat there, and I loved it so much that I actually bought a flat in Central Bath, it's like Georgian. It was built, it's one of the Crescents, and it was built in 1803, I think, and I absolutely love it.
That is awesome. I'm completely jealous. Sounds great. So tell us, how did you get into writing?
As I think I said to you before the podcast started that I am actually celebrating my 20th year in publishing in 2021. So as you can imagine, back in the day, there was no indie publishing. There was no Kindle. The world was a very different traditional place. And I had decided that I wanted to leave the work that is, shoving you in a cubicle all day and you have no freedom and so few choices in your own, so little control over your destiny. And I had got a bit depressed and I was reading romance and Harlequins. And I was in the middle of reading, I still remember it was a Jennifer Blake. It was a lush historical set in Louisiana. And I had that moment that I could do this moment. I gave myself 1 year. I joined RWA. I tried to learn my craft. It took me 4 years of very hard work, but I did finally break into Harlequin. And my kind of funny story is Harlequin still does, but then it really, really worked on lines. And I submitted to Temptation because that was my favorite line. It was the one I read the most. Then they started Love and Laughter, which was romantic comedy, which of course is where my heart lies. So I was like, great. So I wrote another one and I had an editor that really liked me and she kept passing these books up to Birgit Davids-Todd, who was the senior editor at the time. And I think they were on Birgit's desk somewhere. So then the second one she passes up and then they opened this brand new, it's so funny looking in the rearview mirror of 50 Shades of Grey, but the super sexy line was Blaze and it was so my wheelhouse. They could be funny. They were contemporary, sort of smart women, not the secretary that falls in love with the billionaire so much. And of course had quite a bit of sex in them. So they had a contest and I won the contest. So my very first sale to Harlequin, they bought my Blaze, they bought my Temptation, and they bought my Love and Laughter. So wow. I had a pretty good, jumping off start. And then of course I had to keep writing books for 3 lines, which was actually super fun.
Wow. That is impressive. And so I guess you learned early on how to be efficient and productive. If you were writing for 3, were you turning in 3 books a year?
No, I was turning in more like 6 books a year. And wow. I came out of the newspaper business. So if there's one thing I know how to do, it's you meet a deadline and, you figure it out.
Well, that is awesome. Well, what would you say is your definition of success and has it changed over time?
I think it hasn't. Everything I just said to you about why I started writing is still true. I love being self-directed. I like that I can, as you can see from my bio, I love to travel and I like to drop things and go when the mood takes me. And this job is actually a benefit. Because as you know, everywhere you go in the world, there's a story or, an idea. You just get that well refilled and meet new people with new perspectives. And I think it's absolutely wonderful. So that to me is success, is being able to set my own schedule and live my life on my terms. And yes, money is a big part of success, but it's so not the number one. It's probably like 3, for me, 4 maybe. Yeah.
I think that's true that a lot of times I started off thinking about success as like if I reach this certain income goal. But then as my career's gone on, I'm like, okay, so that's not the main reason I'm doing this.
And here's the trouble with money goals, as you know. So you go, oh, if I could just make $100,000, and then you get there and then you're like, okay, $250,000. And then next thing you're like 7 figures, I've got you in my sights, and I think it's very easy because as you know, the more successful you get, the more you become, you start hanging around with more successful people again. And it's really easy to get sucked into that. So I think, if anyone's looking for advice on this podcast, I think it's really important to know yourself. Those people that are making 7 figures are earning it and they work very, very, very hard and they know things that, I don't understand about data and advertising and marketing. And so, good for them, but you can kill yourself trying to be something that you're not and burn out.
Yeah. And there's a lot of burnout going on right now. I think that a lot of people are experiencing it. So, but we're going to get into that in a little bit. We're going to talk about staying in the career for the long-term longevity. But for right now, let's focus on what do you wish you had known about writing or craft?
I wish I had known then, and still wish I knew now, exactly how to use commas. I try and I try and I try, and I always get it wrong. Thank goodness for good editors, because at some point I think you have to own, this is probably knowledge I will never have. And who has it, so I don't have to. So probably it's stuff like that. My grammar, considering my degree is in English, my grammar is not as good as it could be, but I work really hard to find people that can fill in my gaps.
Yeah. Yeah. Because when you're being creative, you've got to, I have to kind of put the grammar aside and get the scene down, and then you can go back in and fix all that stuff. Yeah. But what about marketing? What do you wish you'd known about that?
I still wish I understood marketing. I think what's so hard, and again, I go back to, the most successful people I know, there are a couple where, one of them is like the data person. Usually it's the guy that's the data person and she's like the writer, and it's just a marriage literally made in heaven. Or there are these wonderful people who have those kind of both sides of their brain are equally strong. I feel like whichever is the creative side of mine is like a melon, and my practical side is like a dried lentil. And so I just really wish I understood marketing. So, what I have learned, I think, is you can only do what you can do. And I keep trying and I keep learning. And I am currently taking Sky Warren's Facebook ads course for the third time, hoping I'll finally get it. And, I try to work on AMS ads. But for me, what has worked out the best is I still release a lot of books in a year. Writing is the thing that I do the best and the thing I protect the most. And I'm very social and I like people. And so starting this Facebook readers group has really been, it's not like gonna, change my world or anything, but it's the place where I interact with readers, and that I'm good at. So I think partly for me, it's been figuring out what I am good at. And I'd like to be better at the things I'm not good at. And I've tried hiring people to do ads, and my experience is no one knows your books like you do. Yeah. So at some point, unfortunately, I think I've had to bring that back in-house. I have people that help me with it, but at the end of the day, it's still on me. I can't even remember what your question was now. I've rambled so long, but it was something about marketing, and I'm really not very good at it.
No, well, that's good, because I think if you, like you said, you release a lot of books, and that in itself is a form of marketing, because if there's always a new book coming out or one on the horizon, that does its own kind of magic thing to pull readers in, I think. So I think that's really smart. Yeah.
I think so. And the best, as we all know, very best marketing is when someone says to their friend, oh, you got to try this series.
Yes.
And if you write long series, and I know we're going to talk about that later, if you write long series, once you have them, I find by book 2, sometimes people are like, I'll try book 1. It's only 99 cents. And like, oh, not for me. If I get them to book 2, I've got them. And so I more and more am thinking about what is the organic reach and how can I improve that? Because that's what I think I'm good at. Facebook ads, AMS ads, that stuff is hard. And it changes all the time. It never gets easy.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's a constant learning curve. Some things like you can learn and then you're good, but that one you've always got to be tweaking and checking. So I'm with you. I'd rather just write the next book. Yeah. Well, what assumptions did you make at the beginning of your writing career, and looking back, were they right or wrong?
My assumptions when I started my career, and we have to go back and remember that I sold my book in the year 2000. My first book came out in 2001. My assumption was that I would be able to build that career, within Harlequin. I looked at people that had, Nora Roberts is the most shining example. People that started out with Harlequin and built these wonderful careers. And I thought that I was on that path. And then what began to happen was, disruption. The industry began to change so fast and so crazily. And I was still employed by Harlequin and Kensington, and I was so grateful. But in retrospect, the people that are killing it now are the ones that lost contracts and, they got fired or they couldn't break into publishing. And darn it. So it weirdly, I think, my success sort of worked against me there, because I was, I was loyal and I was safe, and if I could do anything differently, it would have been to jump sooner, obviously, into indie publishing and really embrace it and understand it. But hey, hindsight, I'm still here.
I know. We have kind of the same thing because my first book came out in 2006. And so I do remember I was writing in cozies, and those kind of took a nosedive, and a bunch of people lost their contracts. And it was like everyone was kind of in mourning, and it was so sad. And I look back now and I go, a lot of those people, they had 5-6 books that they owned, and they put them up, and they, exploded in indie publishing. So sometimes, what you think is terrible may not be that terrible. But at the time, that was all we knew was, traditional publishing. So, yeah. Well, have you ever made a mistake that turned out to be a good thing?
Have I ever made a mistake that turned out to be a good thing? I've made so many mistakes. I think when I decided to finally try indie publishing, I still had option clauses on, Harlequin owned my option for category romance, and I think it was Kensington had an option on my next single title romance. And the mistake is nobody was obeying their option, clauses. People were just going and writing romance and, making tons of money. And I was like, that I can't do, I'm Canadian, right? We don't break rules. I'm like, I can't do that. So I wrote a mystery because I was like, well, they don't have an option on mystery, and I love mystery. And so in a way it was a mistake because I totally would have got away with it if I'd continued with romance. But of course, that's what started my mystery career. And I love writing mystery. And I now 90% mystery and 10% romance, and super happy with that. So
I can totally see that. I had the same issue because when I went indie, all my stuff was traditionally published, and I didn't own any of the books, any of the IP. And so I essentially did what you did. I just started over with a new series still in mystery, but and sometimes you have to do that. So do you have any advice for people who are traditionally published now and would like to go indie?
Well, I think if you're traditionally published now, I think my advice would be look very carefully before you leap, because there's a lot that's good about being traditionally published. It's really easy to say, oh, you don't make any money, and, they get everything and you get nothing. But as someone who's been on both sides of the fence, and I know you will, I can see you nodding there, is imagine all you had to do was write a manuscript. Imagine you didn't care about Facebook ads or AMS ads. You didn't have to hire an editor. You didn't have to hire a cover designer. You didn't have to go back and forth, 100 times perfecting and hoping that you were right about your choice of cover and all those other things. I feel like right now I'm maybe 25% of my day is writing, and the rest is administration and just the business. And if someone else took that, if any traditional publishers are out there right now, I would seriously consider, the right traditional contract. I think, maybe being hybrid. So, but that wasn't your question. So, but if you're like, okay, I'm not really happy where I am, I don't get treated very well, I want to go indie, I would just say, do it. Take the leap. The very worst thing that can happen to you is you flop and you go back to your traditional publisher. So what? Indie publishing, what's so wonderful about it is we endlessly reinvent ourselves. The business churns around and changes every minute. And so there's room for everybody. So, if you're remotely entrepreneurial and you don't mind doing all that extra work, and it's a lot, give it a try. Try it under a different name. Your traditional publisher doesn't have to know.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good advice. Yeah. Well, okay. So going back to the mistakes questions that we like to ask, have you ever had the opposite where you thought something was like a super great, brilliant idea, and then it turned out to be not so great? And we all have these things where we're like, this is going to be wonderful, and then it kind of flops.
Well, maybe Tony Diamond maybe is that project, because that was, we I don't know if you were at the RWA, and I can't even remember what year it was. It was around like maybe 2006, 2005, somewhere in there. It was in Dallas, and we got double booked with Mary Kay. And were you at that conference? It was insane because, of course, we were like, right? We're like 2,000, RWA was like 2,000 women all dressed up, mostly a bunch of introverts trying to pretend they're extroverts, very, 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 jittery energy. And then income, probably 5,000 Mary Kay people also all dressed up, all very much like us, except super more extroverted. And what happened was you get these crazy stories. Literally, I think I was offered a makeover 100 times. And there were these stories of people, like someone yelling at, a Mary Kay lady yelling at a romance writer saying, "You're not allowed to wear open-toed shoes," because we were all getting mixed up. And I thought, oh my God, there's such a good mystery here. And so that's where Tony Diamond actually came from. She's brash, she's pushy, she's essentially a Mary Kay lady. And then I set her in a mystery writing conference, and that was the genesis. And she's such a fun, because she's so hideous. She's such a fun sleuth. And what was I'm so sorry. What was the question again?
Oh, it was like, did you start out with something that you thought was great, and then maybe it wasn't so good later on?
Oh yeah. So at that point, my agent, I was, in that one, I was trying to publish traditionally, and I sent it to my agent, and I met with one of those agencies where they workshop your book, and, a bunch of people in the agency read it, and I kept getting comments, and I rewrote that book, I don't know, 2 or 3 times. Mm-hmm. And then they sent it out. And this was probably 2008, 2009 when it went out on submission. Well, of course, that was a very dark time in the world, and it didn't sell. And I was crushed because I thought it was such a good book. My agent thought it was such a good book. And that was one of those things that seemed such a mistake. I'd spent all this time. I'd gone into a genre, that was new for me. And of course, that's really what launched my indie career. When I finally had the courage to put it out, for those times and what I knew, it did really well. And now I'm, all these years later, my career is nearly all mystery. So I think it seemed like a bad thing. It turned out to be a really good thing, because if I was traditionally published, they would let me do 1 book a year.
Yeah.
It would be very, very different.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Well, going off of the conflict at the conference and kind of the humor in that, your books seem to have a lot of humor in them, and you like writing funny, humorous situations and things like that. So do you have any tips for writing humor or including that in your books? Like, one of your series is the Vampire Knitting Club. And I just love that title, because that it's not going to be a dark, serious series. So
my vampires are not very nasty. No, they're cuddly vampires. Yeah, I think, excuse me, I'm just gonna take some water. Yeah, I think the thing with humor, it's the unexpected, isn't it? What makes you laugh? You're like, you set your reader up, and you're going on a path, and then we make connections in our mind, and we see patterns, and you think, oh, it's going to go there. And then when you send it there, we surprise somebody and we make them laugh. And one of the ways we do that is quirky people. So, Tony Diamond is a really good example, because she's so larger than life. Mm-hmm. But most of us have come across someone who's in those kind of, direct sales, pyramid type direct sales, and we know what they're like. And so you immediately, I think, you get on board with her because you understand. But I've also given her this sort of weird intelligence. And even as she's trying to push herself into your house and, give you a makeover or get you to be one of her salespeople, her eyes are always searching out, and she's putting things together. So I think she's funny because she's just so unlikely. And then I think also with humor, it's like, it's sort of putting things together that don't seem like they belong. So as you said, like just the Vampire Knitting Club, I came up with this idea quite a long time ago. And it was when I was watching True Blood on TV, from those wonderful Charlaine Harris novels. And at the same time, the biggest best-selling book at the time was the Friday Night Knitting Club. And it was around the time, and I can't even remember what year we're talking, that mashups were really big. And the biggest horror in my world is that someone wrote Pride and Prejudice and zombies and, took my beloved Jane Austen and put horror in it.
And that was a big hit at that time.
Right? Yeah. And then all of a sudden, mashup that I'd never even heard of, mashup was a thing. And here's where indie is so very, very fun. Nobody in traditional pub. In fact, I even talked to my editor at the time about the Vampire Knitting Club, and I didn't really know what it was. And she was like, yeah, cute title. I don't know what that is. No, we don't want it. And so I put it aside. And then, of course, when Paranormal Cozy started being quite popular, I was like, oh, that's what it is. It's Paranormal Cozy. And so I was living in Oxford at the time. And anyway, that doesn't matter. But it was, I think immediately you go, oh, it's a knitting club. I know what that is. It's a knitting shop. It's set in Oxford. I immediately have a mental picture. And now you've got vampires in the basement. So you've immediately set up these extremely unlikely things. And you already know, you don't have to read the book to know. Every time these two bump into each other, there's opportunities for humor. So yes. I think when you're writing humor, it has to come from who are your characters. Your characters always have to be true to themselves, and forcing it. Readers are, humor is so hard when it's forced. Readers don't think that's funny, so that's where I go back to Tony Diamond again, because she's so easy, because you immediately know this is what she's going to do. She's not going to take a back seat. Doesn't matter if she's told not to. She's always going to push forward because she can't help herself. It's in her nature. And so a lot of humor then comes from pitting people who are very different from that and sort of, just twisting it. And I love wordplay. I love puns. I love playing with language. And I think that's the other place maybe where my humor comes.
Yeah. Well, so do you have a lot of the humor in your, I've heard of some people who write a draft and then they go back and they add in and make it funnier, or do you just like include it as you go along? And it may depend on your writing.
I can't help myself. When I did my master's, I went into it thinking, okay, I have a career doing, these wacky cozy mysteries, and I've done all this romance. I'm going to write a serious literary fiction novel, and that's what I went in to do. And they're all very serious people, of course. In the UK, and our tutors tended to be very, very well known literary fiction personalities. And I kept trying. And every time I would end up doing something silly and making it funny. That's just how I see the world. Yeah. And so I discovered that I'm probably never going to write a serious literary fiction.
I think that's okay, though.
I think it's okay.
Yeah. This reminds me, we interviewed H. Claire Taylor, and she said the same thing. I can't remember if she was getting an MFA. She was in school at the university, and they were like, what is this humor in this? And she was like, I don't know, a little bit of joy in your day. And they were just not into it. So very common that that's not well received, I guess. So.
I know, it's a shame, isn't it? And I felt like, the worst thing they could say is, oh, it's a bit Mills and Boone. Oh, so I didn't fit all that well.
Yeah,
it was a great year, but yeah.
But it is interesting because readers love humor. They love comedy. They love light. They like to read light things. My books are lighthearted. And there's a little disconnect between what is seen as worthwhile, in some people's eyes, and what people really enjoy reading. So anyway, that's a long tangent we could go off on.
And I agree with you so much. And especially, I think one of the things this pandemic has taught me is that, well, I think I knew it before, but when I used to write for Harlequin, we would get these letters, and you get letters from people that are like, you know what, my husband was dying. I'm sitting by his bed. Thank you for this novel. It gave me 3 hours of pleasure in a dark time. And certainly while we're in this pandemic, we are doing a great service to people who are stuck home. They're tired of Netflix. There's nothing left. You get your Kindle out, and there's this whole world of delightful stories. And frankly, it saved me. Do you think I'd rather be in Oxford, knitting with a bunch of vampires, or like looking out the window at the real world? It's my happy place.
I know. Yeah. There are many days when I'm like, I see the news and then I think, okay, I'm just going to go into my little fictional world, and it's so much nicer in here. So it's an escape for me too. So,
and we get to control the outcome.
Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah. Well, the Vampire Knitting Club is a long series. So I wanted to ask you about writing a long series. Did you plan it out? And how you have propelled it? It's like 13 books, right? Right now?
Book 13 is coming out in May.
Yeah.
So I'm not much of a planner, to be honest with you, which has probably been, when I first started writing mystery, that was sort of one of my stumbling blocks, because you really do need to plot a mystery to a certain level, right? And I read that Agatha Christie didn't always know who did it until she got to the end, that was a real light bulb moment for me, because that happens to me too. I think it's, the butler, and then it turns out, oh no, it was the neighbor. And yet somewhere in my subconscious, I had planted those clues. I hadn't even seen it coming. And I figure I don't see it coming, the reader won't see it coming. And the same holds true for planning a long series. When I started it, that's the first time I ever did rapid release. And I put out the first 3 Vampire Knitting Club books within, I think, 5 weeks. Wow. And my thought was, it's either going to work or it isn't. And when you do rapid release, the nice thing about it is you very quickly know if it's going to work or not. And, I knew by the time the 3rd one came out that this had legs. Yeah. So, kind of goes back to what I was saying before, when you've got these characters that always act in a certain way. And, I'm no fool. I come out of romance. I set up a love triangle. So I had, the cop who's completely human and has no idea, has no imagination about this other stuff that's going on. And then I've got the, tall, dark, sexy vampire. And then my sort of, a little bit young and a bit of an ingenue. She's just discovering she's got witch powers. These are all very, very common tropes in mystery and in paranormal mystery. And then it was having them always act a certain way. And of course it's this, small neighborhood, because the shop is set in a little street, Harrington Street, little shops. And Oxford is all about the universities and the wonderful, the dark alleys. And there actually are tunnels that go under Oxford that they were using in the Middle Ages. And so it was really easy to go, well, that's where the vampires live. And so what I've really done is, as I'm writing one book, I'm usually starting to think, okay, this happens in the bookstore. And what if the gal that works in the bookstore, who's in love with her boss, decides to use a love potion? Well, of course, it's all going to go wrong. And so then, the witches get involved with the love potions, and now the vampires are involved, trying to help with some other aspect. And I use my vampires like the Baker Street Irregulars, like Sherlock Holmes, Baker Street Irregulars. So they never drive the plot, but they're vampires. They're out at night. They've got super sensitive hearing and sight, and they bring back all these clues. And so from book to book, what's so lovely is, about a long series is you're always deepening your main characters. The relationships get stronger. And I'm currently, as part of my pandemic I'm watching Doc Martin, which went like 10 years or something. It's set in Cornwall, and it's this it's a very simple concept. The guy, the doctor from London, the surgeon from London, who comes to be village doctor in this quirky little village in Cornwall. But every show, you're building a bigger relationship with this wonderful cast of these wacky people. And that's what I do. So every murder mystery is complete unto itself, but there's all these threads, like a piece of knitting, all these threads that spread out, and the pattern grows. And so the arc is generally my witch learning a bit more about her powers, stepping into herself a little more, what's going to happen with the romance, and then a self-contained mystery, so that it's not, I never set out and I went, this will be book 1, book 2, book 3, and it'll go to book 20 and then it'll be done. It was always, I see a little bit ahead. So I'll probably plot the next book when I finish this one. And then, then we'll just see. And
yeah. So it sounds like it's kind of organic. It comes from the characters and what they're experiencing, and then that you kind of follow that trail into the next book.
100%. I could have said that way quicker. Yeah, it's organic.
No, I'm just like trying to figure out, trying to summarize. So yeah, because I think that's I think with a mystery, it's easy to be focused on or for me, it's easy to be focused on the plot and getting the mystery right. And then I think what readers are reading for is that long, I mean, they like the mystery, but they also really enjoy the long thread of the characters. So I have to ask, did you resolve the love triangle, or is it still ongoing?
Book 13 is
Getting
supposed
close?
to be a wedding. So
okay.
we'll have supposed to be. We'll have
There's
to see.
A little hint for you.
Yeah.
That's funny. All right. Well, we did want to touch too on just like writing through all the changes in publishing, because like you've been traditional, you're now indie, and you know, publishing is like there's all these ups and downs of things that we really can't control. So, you know, what advice or tips, or what do you wish you had known about just being a long-term author?
I think you can't take it too seriously. What feels true now, excuse me, won't be true in a month or a year from now. You have to look after yourself. The only thing that you and I bring to our work that any other person on the planet could not bring to our work is our sensibility, our creativity, our vision of the world. That's the one thing that only I can do in my business as much as I can. And, you know, as I've got a little bit more successful and I can afford to do it, I hire people who are better at those things than I am. So self-care is super important. And I love indie publishing for so many, many reasons. But what I really worry about, and I think there are a lot of people out there who will tell beginning writers things that are, in my opinion, not true. And I would say, before you take any advice, look at the person who's giving it. Do they have something to gain? Are they trying to sell you a course? Things like, no one can tell you what to do about your book. Write one draft and put it out because it's your vision. And I am like, that is so wrong on every level. And I just feel for these poor people who are thinking that that's okay. And it's like, you know, like thinking you're going to win the Olympics in swimming, and you jump into a swimming pool and you don't know how to swim yet. You're more likely to drown. And so I think, please take the time to learn your craft and learn from people who know better than you. You know, Sarah has a great course on her website about writing the cozy mystery. Learn from the people who know what they're doing and take your time. Send it out to beta readers. Get an editor. Learn grammar, or, you know, if you struggle with it, understand that you struggle with it, and get a really good editor who's good at that kind of thing. So I think that's my advice, and everything else will come. And particularly indie, it's endlessly fluid. If you screw it up and you get the wrong cover, oh, well, get a new cover, you know? So I think don't expect, you know, and there are way too many of these success stories, you know, on these websites that are like, oh, you know, I put out my first book and my second book, and now I made $1 million. Well, good for you. Maybe that's true. Maybe it isn't. We can't check, but every path is different. And, you know, this should be a long-term career. I hope it will be for all of us, and have fun with it, right?
Yeah.
Do what you love. I mean, if you don't love it, if you don't love writing, this is not a get-rich-quick scheme, this writing gig. It is hard work, and it's long-term, and you'll make mistakes, and you'll have joyous days and days when you can't write, and every day you get up and you start over again.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot easier ways to make money.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, what do you think is the best thing you've done to set yourself up for success?
I think having an English degree really helped. Being a reader, being an avid, passionate reader, and reading widely really helps. Taking the time to learn your craft. You know, I mean, I was so lucky in some ways. RWA was, and I think still is, a wonderful organization. Even if you don't write mystery, for, you know, you can buy their audio recordings from their conferences about how to plot a mystery, how to write humor, how to do suspense, whatever is your thing, how to do Amazon ads. So I think, you know, that was really good, learning from people who, and I still do. I have mentors who know so much more than I do, listening to people who know more than you do, and making sure, and I'm really bad at this. I mean, I'm sitting here in a back brace because my back is so bad from all these years of sitting. So I'm the worst person to give this advice. But I think, self-care is so important. Getting out for your exercise every day, eat sensibly, all those good things. If you want to have a long career, it's kind of what you have to do. And I think just, I love what I do. And that's been the best thing. And even when I have a bad day, would I rather have a bad day in the tunnels of Oxford with my delicious vampires that I love and adore? Or would I rather, be ringing up groceries at Walmart? Well, I know what I do. So I just get up every day and do it. And I'm so lucky.
I know. I agree. I had a friend that said, even the worst writing day is better than the best pharmacy rep day. Because that was what she was.
And I by the way,
I agree.
I'm so grateful to the women and the men who are ringing up food at Walmart, by the way. That I didn't mean that in any way negatively, but we all have to find joy in what we do, right? So I feel very, very, very blessed to have had this long career and still look forward and plan to go on as long as I can. My poor little fingers can still type.
Well, that is awesome. So thanks for joining us today. Can you tell everybody where they can find out more about you and your books?
I would be delighted to. So my website is nancywarrenauthor.com. And if you like the Vampire Knitting Club or any of my books, my Facebook group, I'm there most days. It's Nancy Warren's Knitwits on Facebook.
That is an awesome title for the group. Well, this has been fun. And I think that there's a lot of good information in here for people. So I think it'll be great. And thanks for joining us. Thanks for listening today, and thanks to Alexa Larberg for editing and producing the show. And you can find all the links at wishidknownthenpodcast.com, and we'll see everybody next week. Bye, everybody.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Wish I'd Known Then podcast. We hope this episode inspired you, empowered you, and made you laugh a little bit too. If you loved it, tell your friends about it. And if you feel so inclined, leave us a review. We look forward to being with you again next week.